Kingston's aging population is most at risk for COVID-19. Self-isolation has become a way of life. From the Community Foundation for Kingston Area, I'm joined by Tina Bailey. And from Frontenac-Kingston Council on Aging, I'm joined by John Mursky. So Tina, I'll start with you. Tell me about the most recent grant you made to the Council on Aging.
So we're excited to fund this project. As you identified, seniors isolation is a significant issue in general, and it's only magnified because of the pandemic and the physical distancing that we're all experiencing. So really proud to fund this particular grant that John will tell us all about in a minute. The proposal came in just before the pandemic hit, and we advanced it for funding now, knowing that the issues are just going to be much more significant now. So looking forward to getting some updates from John on the project.
Absolutely. And John, how do you intend to use the grant you got?
Well, I'm excited to announce that we are almost ready to launch our project. And you know that case studies show that senior isolation really affects their health. As a matter of fact, there are some studies that show that an isolated senior is suffering the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So our project is designed to break that isolation and to rebuild the seniors' social networks. And the way that we do that is that we have volunteers, and our organization is completely volunteer run. And the funding that came from the Community Foundation is really appreciated because it allowed us to move the project forward. But the way that it works is we have volunteers who will be trained, and I can talk about that later, and the volunteers call a senior every day at around the same time. And it's usually in the morning, and that's why we call it the Sunshine Call Project. So the volunteer calls the senior and they chat. After a while, the senior and the volunteer have established a relationship of trust, and they know each other. And so the volunteer then will say to the senior, I know another senior who really shares your interests, and I'd like to introduce you to that senior. So the hope is then that the first senior, accepts the invitation to speak to the second, and now there are two seniors and the volunteer talking every morning. Eventually, a third senior is invited to the group, and eventually a fourth senior is invited. So now what we have is 4 seniors every morning chatting to the volunteer and with each other. And since they share interests and now they have a chance to get to know each other, they will be encouraged to call each other on their own and thus rebuild their social network so that they are no longer alone. And the number of phone calls that they get increases from 0 to the 1 from the volunteer to the unlimited number that the volunteers or the seniors have between each other. And that's the project.
Wow. And wouldn't it be great when this is all over if the 4 of them get together and become good friends and becomes an ongoing relationship?
That's exactly the aim of this project, is to give them that social network. And you know, it can go further. So from being isolated, as they get to know their friends on the phone, they can get together. The idea is that maybe they'll go to the senior center, maybe they'll get together for a coffee. But even if they don't, just the fact that they have that many people calling them and that they have someone to talk to, that breaks that isolation.
It would be interesting if you could look back on this very weird time that we're all going through and say, well, something really positive happened because I wouldn't have known this person otherwise if this hadn't all happened. That's now the volunteers, you're going to need a lot of volunteers then.
Yes, actually, the commitment we're asking for is quite substantial. We're asking a volunteer to agree to spend a year doing this. So it's a year making a call each day to initially 1 person, eventually 4, and then once they get together, then again it's just 1 phone call. But still, it's quite a commitment we're asking for. But on the other side of it, we're preparing our volunteers really well. So in the pod, to answer your question, we call them a pod. So it's a group of 4 seniors and a two volunteers so that the two volunteers can spell each other off and cover and so on and so forth. So in essence, for four seniors, we have two volunteers. Now our pilot project, we're hoping to start off with 16 seniors, so 4 pods, and that means 8 volunteers. And we're looking right now is actually we'll be advertising by Friday, Saturday. We're looking for 12 volunteers to train. And before the volunteers make their first call, they'll get about 10 hours of training. And we have an ethicist on our group, and he'll be providing some training. We've also partnered with the bereaved families of Kingston, and they're helping with the training. We have some volunteers who have done this thing before and some other psychologists. So about 10 hours of training for each volunteer before they even make their first call, to give them that confidence to make that call, and to know how to handle the conversation and direct the conversation so that we get the positive outcome we're all looking for.
So this, for these volunteers, this isn't for everybody, clearly. So what soft skills or hard skills do you want to see in a volunteer before they sign on for this project?
We're looking for someone who cares, who has some compassion, and who is willing to make that commitment to call the seniors, to talk to them, and to stick with it. That's the key, to stick with it, because we're asking for that long commitment. And not surprisingly, we already have 2 volunteers who are anxious to get going. So I think just from background discussions that we've had with people, I think we won't have too much trouble finding those volunteers. And certainly the number of seniors who are out there who would benefit from the program is quite large in the Kingston area.
Now, I'm thinking, after you get to know somebody that well, or even if it's just over the phone, you're speaking with them every day, maybe things will start coming out that they've never really told anybody before, but they clearly need help with it. Are they going to be trained in how to recognize, oh, let's say there's some abuse going on, there's maybe a health issue that they're not dealing with? Are they going to be trained in how to deal with that kind of thing?
As a matter of fact, yes, the local LIN has staff who have agreed to help train our volunteers. That would be one of the training sessions. And they will train our volunteers on the resources available to them. So if we combine that with the training from the ethicist, the training from the psychologists, and now the training from the representatives from the LIN, who give the volunteers the contacts of who to call and how to deal with various issues like the ones that you've described, they should be well prepared. In addition to that, each group of volunteers will have a volunteer coordinator who's a person who's even more highly trained, and actually one of them, I believe, is a registered nurse. And those coordinators will then be also a resource for the volunteers. And in addition to that, we will all be getting together once a month on a Zoom meeting. We'll have guest speakers, and the volunteers will have an opportunity to help us create the agenda for each of those meetings. So if there's a common thread that runs through those telephone conversations, we can find an expert who can help the volunteers deal with that kind of an issue and how best to deal with it. Yeah.
Sounds well thought through. It sounds like a wonderful project. If someone out there says, gee, I'd like to do something like that, I think I would enjoy helping out and being a volunteer. Or if someone is a senior and saying, yeah, I would really love to have a phone call every day and make some new friends, how can they reach you?
So anyone who wants to contact us, that would be a senior who would like to receive a call, or someone who would like to volunteer for this pilot project. They can reach us at, they can phone us at 613-542-1336, or they can email us And this one is actually an easy one to remember, I think. It's basically sunshine calls sign up at gmail.com is our email. And of course, we have a website. And if they look up councilonaagingkingston.com, then they can find online the information on how to register and a little bit more about the project. And that will all be up by Friday.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you so much for telling me about this. It's a great project, and good seeing you again, Tina. Everybody stay safe.
Thank you.